There was once a Minnesota farmer in a rural area called Salem, near the settlement of Kensington, and while clearing more space on his newly acquired land so as to plow and grow crops, he pulled over a tree on his property and immediately noticed something unusual. Surrounded by the roots of a poplar tree and covered with centuries of mud was a chunk of worked stone that bare the inscriptions for which he was unfamiliar with. And after showing many people his mysterious finding, he learned that these inscriptions were called runes, which is a form of writing used by Germanic and Nordic tribes and is often said to be an imitation of Latin letters. The farmer bought a book on the subject in hopes of teaching himself to read the runes on the stone, and as word traveled and eventually a copy of the inscriptions found its way to the University of Minnesota, where Alla Spreda, a professor in Scandinavian languages and literature, declared the stone a forgery before even laying eyes on the stone. The inscription on the stone reads, 8 Gotalanders, which is an area of Sweden occupied by the Geats, and 22 Northern, exploration journey from Vinland far to the west. We had a camp by 2 shelters 1 day's journey north from this stone. We were fishing one day. After we came home, found 10 men red from blood and dead. Maria saved from evil. And on the side of the stone, it's written, there are 10 men by the inland sea to look after our ship's 14 days' journey from this peninsula. Year 1362. The farmer, Olaf Oman, eventually sold the stone to the Minnesota Historical Society, and today, this controversial stone sits in the Runestone Museum in Alexandria, Minnesota. In 1095, one of the most influential speeches of the Middle Ages was given by Pope Urban II, calling for the Christians of Europe to unite and wage war against the Muslims and take back the Holy Land, proclaiming it Deus vult, or God's will. Now, while the Crusades have been labeled as extreme Christian aggression by the post-World War II, anti-Christianity, anti-Western propaganda from the globalist elites, there was just cause for this action, as though it's not well known and definitely isn't taught in schools anymore. The Middle East was, since the birth of Christianity itself, overwhelmingly Christian. And with the rise of Islam, which contrary to what's been said, the hadiths of Muhammad prove that it is not a religion of peace, and millions of Christians had been brutally murdered and forced into slavery by the conquering Muslims, the Middle East had become by force Christian no more. The Knights Templar were formed and were the military branch of the church, and made their way to the Holy Land and made it safe for Christians to pay pilgrimage to it once more. Though payment for their protection, and through becoming essentially the first central banking system, the Knights Templar became powerful and eventually ordered to be exterminated on Friday, October the 13th, 1307, not only because of their power and wealth, but by accusations of heresy, but maybe because when the Knights took over Jerusalem and started excavating the ruins of the Temple of Solomon, what they discovered about Christianity that had been hidden for centuries from its followers would topple the Catholic Church's stranglehold on power and control throughout Europe. The knights were terminated, yet not all were captured, and although most were killed in England, many fled to Scotland, where they were not persecuted, and thus their secrets of Christianity were saved from sure extinction. The Phoenicians, which is a word that translates to red people, possibly due to applying red ochre on their skin and thus red-skinned people, were a seafaring civilization who specialized in navigation and trade, and whose empire stretched from North Africa with the capital city of Carthage up into the Middle East with a city called Tyre in modern-day Israel. At the same time as the Bronze Age in Europe, one of the ingredients to making bronze, copper, with the other being tin, was being mined in America, specifically on an island in Lake Michigan. There, rock carvings depicting a Phoenician-looking ship have been known on this island since the colonizing of the continent. The island also contained what looks to be ports, and several tools have been found in the mines on the island, some of which go on for miles deep underground, along with the byproducts of smelting copper being discovered right off the island's shore. The Phoenician alphabet is what gave rise to our current English alphabet that we use today. Coincidentally, one of the only other known ancient phonetic alphabets was that of the Maya. In the Gulf of America, along the southern part of the Yucatan, lay the ancient ruins and monuments of a mysterious people known today simply as the Olmec. The Olmec civilization was at its peak at the same time the Phoenicians were thought to be making voyages to the New World. And it's not well known, but the Maya and later the Aztecs were performing archaeological excavations on the sites of these people called the Olmec. Several of the rock carvings on Olmec land depict mysteriously dressed bearded figures, which is odd considering the Olmec themselves did not have facial hair. Some of these multi-ton carvings today still sit where discovered, and one labeled as an altar by modern-day academia depicts a seated man holding a baby while on his head is a Phrygian hat. These type of hats were popular and worn throughout the old world. In South America, an empire that stretched from Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, and Peru were the Amaru people. They numbered in the millions and were eventually conquered by the Inca, but from their tradition it gives us the name Amaruca, which is the true naming of America, as even though it's taught Vespucci's real name was not Amerigo, as he changed his name to this after the name of America was given to the new land. Amaruca was adopted by the Inca as a serpent-like god of the Amaru and had special powers and guarded sacred sites and treasures, thus making America or Amaruca the land of the serpent or dragon. Throughout much of the woodlands of New England, numerous stone walls, stone caves, and dolmens, which modern scholars today suggest were built by the original colonists in New England, yet there are writings of these original colonists discovering these ancient stone walls for themselves. These stone structures have been estimated to number in the hundreds of thousands in the woodlands of the Northeast. Carvings, sometimes found on these structures, have been documented, and despite what gets promoted, suggest people from the old world visited Amaruca well before Columbus. Even though once not controversial, depictions and accounts of the first encounters with several different Native American tribes describe them as having pale skin with red or blonde hair. Now, I'm not saying all were, but there are 700 accounts written of explorers encountering tribes of Indians, some with very large stature and having traits typically only seen with Caucasian people or Europeans. From Sir Walter Raleigh to René Delaunay de Bry, Hans Staden in Brazil, and Vespucci himself in the Amazon River, depictions and paintings and first-hand accounts of encountering tribes of Native Americans on either continent sometimes depict them or describe them as having pale skin and European features. Scott Wolter, a forensic geologist, which is a person that specializes in the weathering of carvings on stone, and he's famous for his History Channel series America Unearthed, was asked to take a look at the Kensington runestone several years ago. He told the museum, "You may not like my findings, but the great thing about what I do is I still get paid either way." Now, while going into this with an open mind, he was still very skeptical of the Kensington runestone. Scott thought that would take him a couple of days to debunk. It turned into a month-long journey of him trying to disprove his findings after looking at the weathering of the carvings on the stone. He learned how to read runes and discovered that some of the runes on the stone were not known back at the beginning of the 1900s when the stone was labeled a hoax. One rune in particular, specifically the hooked X, really got Scott's attention, and he soon discovered that the hook on the X had a very, very special meaning. The upwards pointed arrow, or the triangle, is a symbol for the masculine, while the downward pointing arrow is a symbol for the sacred feminine. Also, and very important to the story, the chalice, or grail, is a symbol of the sacred feminine, of the womb. The hook on the hooked X is a symbol for a woman's pregnancy or a baby, and thus making the hooked X, along with being the symbol for the true Holy Trinity, which is the nuclear family, and also along with the serpent or dragon, these are the symbols or the royal bloodline of Christ. And this is the secret, the real treasure, that the ousted Knights Templar brought to the land of the serpent, or Amaruca. Scott Wolter later noticed very small circular carvings, like a tittle above the lowercase I, or dots above a handful of letters on the runestone. This shocked Wolter and highly suggested the remaining Knights Templar had traveled to the new land as the stone suggests. That's because the letters with the dot above them, and only those letters, they spelled out G-R-A-L, or Grail. Thanks for listening. My name is MJ.